Ben has come from Michigan to speak to us about service leadership. So please welcome Ben Lichtenwalner.
Maybe if I do jumping jacks, that'll be a surprise. So I want to start off by introducing you to a friend of mine. This is Scott. And Scott spent the first half of his career as a tax advisor for a large tax firm. He had a dream to one day start his own wealth management company. He had an opportunity in the form of a meeting with a group of high net worth individuals who were all looking for a new financial planner. A couple of them thought he might be the right guy for the job. He obviously took that opportunity. Preparing for it, he went down to the most minute details. He created a PowerPoint deck that went down to every possible thing he would want to address. He thought about every question they would ask. He had prepared everything he possibly could, and then the night he was supposed to fly out for this meeting, his flight got canceled. He rebounded from that, no problem, got an early morning red-eye flight that should get him in just in time. Sitting on board the plane, reviewing his notes for the last time, just getting over those last-minute details, when somebody bumps into him and spills coffee all over his shirt. What's he going to do? We talked earlier about disruption management, but the great thing about this industry that I'm so passionate about is you have the opportunities every day to work with people like Scott, people who have ambitions and goals. Maybe it's not the businessman or the entrepreneur. Maybe it's somebody more like my wife and I, who recently celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary in Mexico. Me being the hopeless romantic wanted to surprise her with a vow renewal ceremony on the beach. And being the wonderful planner that I am, I waited until the day we got in Mexico. Only to discover that these sort of things, I guess you guys know, are usually planned months in advance. I didn't. So what was I going to do, right? You also get to work with family visits. Like little Matthew here, his grandmother made a sudden turn for the worse and was going to be passing very soon. And his family wanted to send him across the country to go see her one last time. But they didn't have the means to fly him out there. What were they going to do? This is the amazing thing about your industry. Every day you have an opportunity to be a help or a hurdle to all these types of individuals that you work with. And whether you and your teams are a help or a hurdle comes largely down to the service leadership culture that you instill in your organization. Whether or not you are educating your employees and ensuring that they are empowered and enabled to go and serve each of these types of individuals in the best manner possible will impact that experience. So today, I think there's three things I want to cover that are important to establishing the right service leadership culture. First, you need to understand the relevant issues in your industry. We talked a lot about them today. In particular, we talked a lot about digital media and the emerging generation of new employees, largely known as the millennials. I'm going to talk about those two today specifically. The other thing I think you need to do is you need to have a little bit different view of leadership than what many people today view it as. And this, I think, fits very well with what John described as service leadership. I view it as a different view. It's not the typical hierarchy of a top-down. It's more about how you are serving each of your stakeholder groups. We'll cover that a little bit later. And last, the third key item I think you need to do is understanding all of your stakeholders. Absolutely, a consumer focus, a guest focus is absolutely critical. But one of the challenges that great leaders face is the understanding of who all their stakeholders are. And that's referred to as a stakeholder circle. We'll talk about that later on today, too. So first, let's get into the issues. Today, in digital media, I want to talk about digital media from both a consumer perspective and from an employee perspective. And there's sort of a leading indicator. We're watching as marketing online is just growing rapidly. Now, that makes sense, right? Because a lot of traffic's going online. But there's a couple other key factors behind that that a lot of people are missing. And if you're going to be a leader in this industry, you need to understand how this area works. You need to be recruiting and training your employees to work in this space. with 25% of all advertising spend going to digital media, it's pretty clear that old media is losing that. Old media is dying, and there's a lot of good examples of this today. For example, a friend of mine, Paul Gillen, runs a website called the Newspaper Death Watch, because there's so many newspapers that are going bottom up every day. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about billboards, and Gary Vaynerchuk's a sort of social media, digital media expert, and when he talks about billboards, he points out people don't look at billboards anymore. It's a scary fact, but it's true. They don't even look at the road. And you're watching, half the people around you are texting. It's scary, but it's true. So who's investing in billboards? Obviously television, with Netflix and streaming video. How many people have actually sat and watched all the commercials through a show anymore? So advertising on traditional media is dying. It'll never die completely, don't get me wrong. It'll still serve the impulse. There will still always be that initiation of an idea that comes through traditional media. But digital media is where the consumers and guests are going now more and more to get their information, and you need to be in that space. So why is it that consumers are going more and more to digital media? First, it's obviously easier for them. They're there more often. But secondly, and more importantly, there's value being driven out of digital media. With 55% more traffic going to blogs today, websites that have blogs get 55% more traffic. And if you think about that, why is that? It's because consumers and guests want value. If you're going to be investing in marketing, why not invest it in something that generates immediate value for your guests? Simple things like a post about the great spots to see in Toronto, or how to pick the best hotel to stay at. These drive value to your guests, and as a result, they see you as providing them value before they even purchase a service from you. So it's not about not marketing or not advertising. It's about sending those funds and those dollars to where they are immediately generating value for your guests. You're probably familiar with the concept of the first moment of truth. This is an old sales format, where basically the consumer's first moment of truth is the first time they interact with your brand or your company. Now with the digital age, Google's coined a term called the zero moment of truth, and that is their first experience with you online. It's not direct, there's a good chance it's not even your direct messaging. It could be a review, it could be a recommendation from somebody else, but that's the zero moment of truth. And that's the first interaction. So the more content you provide of more value to your guests, the greater the zero moment of truth is for your consumers. Now, as you look at millennials in particular, we'll get into them in more detail later, the millennial generation loves to track their brands online. They love to be connected with you online. They love to follow. They love to understand. If they are passionate about your brand or your business, they will follow you and endorse you to their friends and share it. However, this is beneficial to the point when you are the one sending the message and when you are there present. The problem is, a lot of organizations today are not present in that conversation. A lot of organizations, we mentioned earlier, still view social media or digital media as a kid's thing or purely social. But I'm here to tell you, in case, and you probably already know this, but in case you didn't know, there are plenty of competitors out there who are ready to snipe away your guests. They're sitting there and they're watching as your guests post things online, like I'm staying at such and such a hotel in Toronto this weekend, where's a good place to eat? And if you're not the one who answers that, the restaurant at the other hotel that does answer it is getting that guest. So the key to making sure that you are present properly in digital media is about monitoring and listening to those messages online, looking for your guests, looking for that feedback and those questions that are happening. Because again, if you're not there listening, somebody else is and they will take them. Monitoring comes down to three key things that you need to focus on. One is real-time monitoring through social media. This basically has somebody watching as the content is streaming, somebody posts a message, and then they say, oh, they can immediately respond. That's to get the one-off individuals. The second is a more long-term summary report. And you can do these through tools like Google Analytics, and there's tools out there that will send you reports that say, over time, here's what people are saying about your site. They may, every time a new web search comes up that indexes your site, it will let you know. And then the third is more about sentiment analysis. Now, sentiment analysis is it's kind of an emerging trend right now. People don't realize that the computers and the acronyms, the tools that we're using nowadays are getting more and more sophisticated, that they enable us to comprehend and roll up all the comments about a business or brand online. So with all the people mentioning your brand or your business online, statistical analysis will say, are 80% of them positive, are 100% of them positive, or are 80% of them negative? And they might not get every one right, but I assure you they're directionally accurate. So you need to be present there in those conversations to help understand when there's a problem, as soon as there's a problem, and try and disrupt it or stop that problem from happening. From an employee perspective, digital media is an opportunity for you to leverage with your employees in many different ways. First, it's really reassuring to hear that 50% of employees today advocate their brands online. That assumes, of course, that they like the company they work for, right? You have to have a good service leadership in place to help them feel empowered and enabled and supported. But when they do, they will endorse your brand online. And they should be your greatest brand advocates. If they're not, you've got a problem with your leadership. However, the flip side is 60% have actually posted something negative about their employer online. Well, it goes to say that over time, certainly employees are going to be disgruntled at different points in time. Often those are not in public spaces if they're wise about it, or if they're posting them more to their friends and family. But if you don't have service leadership in place, I guarantee you, your percentage or your share of that 60% will go up. And it's almost worse when it's not in the public forum, because then you can't catch it and you can't address it. Now, the really good companies that have got great service leadership in place are understanding this opportunity of the employees and using them as brand advocates, and they're encouraging their employees to share social media, to share about their brand and advocate their brand online. For example, you might want to have a whole repository of great stories about guests who have stayed at your place and given great reviews, or that unique wedding that was hosted there, or how you helped somebody out in a real difficult time. Make those stories readily available so that the next time one of your employees wants to share a great example of your work, have it readily available for them to share it quickly and easily. Then recognize and reward them. I talked about the monitoring earlier. If you are monitoring for mentions of your brand in social media, you will know when people are speaking about your business and about your consumers and your guests. Take that opportunity to recognize the employees and thank them and share with them and say, we appreciate you doing this. You don't want to incentivize them too strongly. If it suddenly becomes like something where they're starting doing it just for the incentive, that's obviously the wrong message to send. But if they feel that you recognize and appreciate it, you'll see more and more of it. Now, I wanted to take a sort of a side note about digital media. The reason I'm so passionate about this is because that sentiment analysis I mentioned earlier is just getting bigger and bigger. And if you look today, the biggest challenge of sort of preventing a standard view of every one of your services that everybody has accepted as an official rating of your service is a lack of standards in the sentiments and in the reviews. If you think about today, you could review it on Hotels.com or Travelocity or Expedia. You can review it in 100 different places. One might use 5 stars, one might use 4 stars, one might use only written up reviews. But as these sentiment analysis engines get more and more accurate, standards start to evolve. And this is starting to happen today. Like if you look at Google, Google is actually rolling up reviews from multiple different sites now. And you will see star ratings from multiple different places. As soon as those analytics get smart enough and the industry gets just a little bit further, I believe this is 3 years out maybe, you're going to see a very standardized rating of your services. You've got to be wondering what it's going to look like for you. You know, right now today, maybe your reviews are great on all sites except for one. But that one site has a really bad review of your property or your business. As soon as that standard gets in place, it's going to hit you pretty hard. So if you're not already actively engaging in these channels and reviews and social media, you really want to get out there and be in that spot. I want to mention, Diana mentioned earlier, your comment about, side note, tangent. You mentioned earlier about the best thing to do is sitting by the pool and hearing this. And it's all there publicly for you right now. Social media reviews are your digital pool, right? If you think about it, it's the spot where you can learn the most about your brand and business just by listening and using different monitoring tools. So one of the best areas to leverage social media and digital media for your brand is looking at the millennial generation. They grew up with this technology. They're familiar with it. They're the best at using it nowadays. In fact, the millennial generation is actually really involved in the travel business, as you know. They've got $226 billion set aside for travel. That's more than any other generation at this time of their age. So they are really ready to travel. 50% of the business flights are expected to be from millennials by 2020. And 80% of those millennials are influenced by those reviews we've been talking about. 80%. That's a lot. Yet there's still a lot of organizations that aren't even responding to the reviews out there. How many of your reviews go unresponded to today? And you're not alone in this industry, by the way. I mean, it's common across industries. But whether it's a positive or a negative review, why in the world should you be out there thanking them for the review or asking them how you can help improve it next time? They've taken the time to provide that feedback. And it goes a little bit further when you think about the real-time reviews. 3/4 of the millennials share their experience on social media. So if you've got 4 guests waiting in line in front of you that are millennials, 3 of them are either typing their review as they speak or framing it in their head as to how they're going to fill it out later.
Take a picture.
Yeah, exactly. So what can you do to help leverage the positive and minimize the negative? Well, a couple of ideas. First, make sure that your employees understand this. Make sure they understand the digital media and the nature of it, especially the millennial generation. It's not too hard to tell when somebody's disgruntled and they're typing away furiously. Why not educate the employees when they see that? Ask them, hey, is there something wrong? Can I help you? You might catch that review before it goes out. I say all this, and the key thing to remember is that this is all happening in public forums, largely in public forums, or in their private networks with their friends and family. As a guy who built half his career building websites for corporations, this one's a little hard to swallow. That only 1/4 of millennials will actually visit your website. They're making their decision on the public platforms. They're making their decision on the travel sites and where they're finding the reviews. Now, that's not to minimize the importance of your website, because those who do go there will still gauge you based on the quality of your website. If your website looks like it was built in the 90s, they're not going to come to you. So it's still important to have a good quality website. Again, it helps me with my previous. It's still important to have a quality website, but it is far less important now than it ever was in the past, and it's far less important than being effective in the public forum. So what about millennials as employees? Well, we mentioned 50% of the flights. That's because they're expected to be 50% of the workforce by 2020. And 75% by 2025. That's a staggering number to think about. 75% of the workforce by 2025. That's 10 years from now. So, if you think about that, you really want to understand about their leadership. What are they looking for in a leader, right? Because if you're going to leverage 75% of your workforce effectively, it's time to stop looking at the negative or framing them with a stereotype and start understanding what is it that they are looking for in their leadership to be more successful, right? Well, there is a very different way to lead millennials than to lead other generations. 77% of millennials say it's essential to connect with a cause at work. So if your message to your employee team is, hey, we're going to make more money this quarter so that you can get a bigger bonus, some will like it, but that's not really motivating to millennials as a whole, right? I know an organization, actually, you guys talking about Bissell Vacuums. They make vacuum cleaners, and they sort of align themselves especially with the pet industry. They say that their vacuums are the best if you have a pet, like a dog or a cat. They're the best at picking up the fur or the hair. So they've connected their cause to animal protection, animal rights, ASPCA. They have a regular occurrence to see dogs walking down the halls in the middle of their office building because they welcome the pets in the office. So what is the cause for your company, for your business? Obviously in the industry there's things, green initiatives are big, recycling is big, renewable energy is big. What is the cause that you can connect to have your employees, especially the millennial generation, feel proud to work there? It can't just be the community day checkbox. Yep, we did our day of volunteering today, and so now we can say we've done it for the year. It should be a reoccurring program that you have throughout the year. They also want coaches and mentors rather than bosses, or managers, by the way. Herman Miller, a small Midwest manufacturer of furniture, they get rid of the term manager, and they call them work team leaders. You thought about that? The term manager is almost a negative to the millennials. To think that you're going to manage me rather than lead me or guide me or influence me puts them on the defensive. Collaboration over competitiveness. We talked about this earlier. I love this. Seneca, on their very first day, puts the students through a collaboration exercise from day one. I love that. This is what millennials want. If you have a very cutthroat environment that has been successful for the past 10 or 15 years, it's not going to be by 2025 when 75% of your workforce is millennials. They're going to want collaboration rather than competition for those jobs. They're going to want a belief and a value, a vision that we can work together to achieve more as a team. Next, they really want work-life integration. I've written about this on my site, and I talk about work-life alignment. It's really the same thing, but it is not the same as work-life balance. Previous generations looked at it as work-life balance. I want to work from 8 to noon, be able to take a lunch and go out and run an errand and come back and work from 1 to 5. To the millennials, they want to have total flex time in their schedule. Now, in your industry, that creates quite a challenge. But there are opportunities to maximize this. Perhaps doing something like letting your teams determine their break times, and so that they can collaborate themselves and figure out what works best for each of them. I realize that there are still plenty of roles that won't work in. What ways can you do this? In what ways can you help them achieve their work-life integration? You know, there's an organization, you guys know, I'll talk about it a little bit later, Zappos.com. One of the things that they do is talk about having coaching services for their employees. Personal coaching is another thing you can consider doing if you can't work on the flex hours. How can you provide services to your employees to make their work life integrate and align better? So I say all this to talk about there's a different view that millennials are crying out for of leadership. And digital media is driving a different view of leadership as well. The open transparency that is occurring for your organizations because people are having these reviews immediately, everybody sees online very honestly and candidly what your organization is like from either the employee view or the customer view. So where you used to be able to control that message from the top down, you can't do that anymore. Your leadership needs to be focused on fixing core and quality issues. If you have a core issue and you know it, you used to be able to sort of sweep it under the rug. Nowadays, you can't do that. And that's where we talk about flipping your pyramid. From a service leadership perspective, from a traditional leadership perspective, you would have the hierarchy view, right? It's the pyramid, you've got the CEO at the top, and then the vice presidents, directors, managers, and individual contributors. So at the very bottom of the pyramid is the individual contributor. At the very bottom of the pyramid are the people who are interacting with your guests on a daily basis. And if you think that this is not really the way it works, then why do the org charts look that way? Right? And what message does that send to the individual contributors? It says, you either keep getting all the crap that's dropped downhill, or you aspire to a tighter or a higher role above. So it's telling them that leadership is an achievement that they can reach, rather than a commitment to service. It's sending the wrong message to the individual contributors, because the only way for them to excel in their career is to climb that corporate ladder. Instead, If you take a different view of leadership and you flip that pyramid, and you say, well, really, the leaders are on the bottom, and they serve everybody above them. And I know this is making some of you squirm, by the way. But if you take this view, what message does it send to the individual contributors? It says, we're here to help you do your job better. We're here to make you a better individual at serving our consumers and our guests. And oh, by the way, when that happens, what do the consumers do? Buy more, which makes the investors happy, right? It's a pretty simple circle. Now, it's very visual, it's very theoretical, but it's an important message to send. I actually had one executive at an organization, when I tried to flip the pyramid in the hierarchy of my org chart, threw the biggest hissy fit in the world. He wasn't even on it. I was careful to make sure he was not at the bottom. He was not at a high level. So this is not an easy thing to do, but it would send the right message. This is what service leadership has at its core. Servant leadership, in particular, says that the executive is there to serve the rest. And by the way, when you look at this, the other thing that's worth noting, if you think about the executives, I want to think how to frame this right. When was the last time many of your CEOs, vice presidents, and directors were working directly with the customers? Sam Walton, from the founder of Walmart in the U.S., back when Walmart was a great organization, don't quote me on that. He was very much a servant leader. The company's changed a lot in its time. But he was very much fond of saying that the only people who really know what's going on in the organization are the cashiers and the people on the floor, because they see it day in and day out. So, not to say that the CEO isn't important. Obviously he is, he or she is. They've got a lot of things to worry about, though. They've got things like strategic plans, budget planning, investor relations. They've got much bigger things to worry about than what happens day to day on the floor. And that's where the individual consumer plays a critical role. So again, wouldn't it make sense to flip the pyramid? Now, I think one of the great things about this organization and Seneca and what they're doing here today is you can see it, the service leadership throughout in what we're seeing here today. It's actually really prevalent in what's happening here in this room. It's an organization that has invited in industry experts to come in and give them feedback on what they need to do differently. And yet, at the same time, are bringing in their students to show them what it takes and are encouraging the students to learn in different environments and different global settings. If you're still having a hard time believing that this is the way that it works, though, I want to tell you a little personal story. I worked for a large nonprofit. I was the CIO, and the CFO, who I reported to, had as a sort of bad habit hiring people, working them to the bone, burning them out, and then firing them, usually less than a year after he hired them. As the CIO, I had the unfortunate pleasure of having to back up the computers pretty secretively of these individuals before they were let go. So I felt like I was endorsing this behavior. I was playing a critical role in supporting this tendency. And one day when he called me into his office to let me know the next director level he was firing, it occurred to me, and I started doing the math as he was going through the details. I had pretty much blocked him out. And I realized that this was the third time in 2 years his entire team had turned over. So I stopped and I said, okay, what is leadership? Because this guy is a CFO of a major nonprofit organization, a nonprofit nonetheless, one that you would think is, a little bit more forward-thinking about your employees. And what he's doing is clearly not leadership. So I sat down and I studied all kinds of books, and I was trying to figure out what is it that I would call leadership. And that's when I came across the term servant leadership, on which this is all based. And I will tell you that as you look across the organizations, the ones that understand this flipping of the pyramid and the full stakeholder circle of, which we'll get to in a minute, of understanding all your key stakeholders and serving all of them, they're the ones that have the greatest sustainable success. Sustainable is a key word there, because at the end of the day, you can get a little bit of success for a short period of time, or even a lot of success for a short period of time, without a model like this. Because you can work your employees to the ground. You can burn them out, and for a couple of quarters or a year, which is popular for publicly held companies. You can get success for a short period of time, but eventually you're going to burn them out and your model's not going to work anymore. And that's where this servant leadership comes in. It comes in when you want long-term sustainable success. So, it's not a new concept though. This is not anything terribly innovative. When you look into it, there's a couple of famous historic examples. Lao Tzu in 500 BC talked about service leadership. He wrote a text about living in harmony, and he said, "The highest type of ruler is one whose existence people are barely aware of. Next comes one whom they love and praise." He also said, "When the leader's task is accomplished and things have been completed, all the people will say, 'We achieved it ourselves.'" Then a couple hundred years later, Kautilya in India wrote a book specifically on leadership, and he said, "The king shall consider as good not what pleases himself, but what pleases his subjects." And he also said, "The king is a paid servant and enjoys the resources of the state together with the people." And then, of course, Jesus of Nazareth has many famous sayings that are servant leadership oriented. He said, "The greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves." So it's nothing new, but there's a lot of great organizations that have picked up on it nowadays. I mentioned Zappos a little bit briefly earlier. So I got to visit Zappos.com out in Las Vegas, and they have a fantastic servant leadership culture. If you go to their offices, you'll see among many other things there a giant sign that hangs above the entrance, and it says a service, or it says Zappos.com, powered by service. And if you ask any of their employees, they'll say, "We're a service company that just happens to sell products." They recognize that service is at the core of what they do, so much so that the record call length for a Zappos.com employee without a sale is now over 10 hours. Sounds crazy, but here's the thing. Elderly people, especially who are a little bit lonely, will call into Zappos because they know that they'll just listen. And the culture of the company is such that they've encouraged their employees to do that. And it's become literally like a hallmark or an award to be one of those individuals who sat on a long call. And it's still going up, because when I was out there 4 years ago, it was 8 hours. I heard recently went up to 10. Now, that's not profitable. But what is profitable is the recognition that you get for that. People start to realize what a great company you are, that you are focused on serving consumers, and as a result, consumers come back for more. They also have, I mentioned the coaching services they provide to all employees. They have what they call the culture wall in one of their stairwells, where employees write whatever they want about the brand or about the culture. And most of it has to do with this incredible coaching service that they provide. They'll write about their achievements that they got through the coach. One of them said, "I became a better dad." One of them that I remember seeing said, what did it say? Oh, they had won some distinctive achievement award out that had nothing to do with their job. My favorite one, though, was the guy who wrote, "I grew my biceps 2 inches." The coach is helping them, and the company is helping them in whatever their passion is. Oh, and by the way, if you want to read more, Tony's book, it's partially his book, partially you got a lot of employees help write it, Delivering Happiness. It's half history of Zappos.com, half servant leadership. Excellent book. Getting closer to your industry, of course, Southwest Airlines. I suspect you guys are probably tired of hearing about Southwest Airlines. Yeah. But there's a reason, right? They are very successful. They're one of the few, if any, airlines that are known for having an incredibly positive relationship with their unions. Herb Kelleher, and if you've heard these stories before, I'm going to kind of go through it fairly quickly because you've probably heard them, but he would show up at Thanksgiving Day and help load baggage so that the employees could go home to their families sooner. So the company was founded, they'll say it was founded on love. I'd say it was founded on servant leadership. And it continues to this day. It's actually also an excellent example of leadership transition. I don't know if you guys probably know this, but Herb Kelleher's assistant became the subsequent CEO, I think, or maybe just president. But she was his executive assistant for years and took over the reins of the company because she knew it so well. Southwest Airlines is a fantastic example of servant leadership. And Ritz-Carlton, Herb Hummler had an interview in which he expressed several key aspects of servant leadership. He talks about how every time he meets with employees, he reassures them that they are more important than he is. So getting back to that individual contributor role. They've also had a history of investing in their communities from the very beginning. He also mentioned in the article that it's always been sort of a cornerstone of Ritz-Carlton to make sure that the guests need what they want, of course. We know that. They have a very high margin, which makes it very easy to do that. But do your guests, or do your employees rather, know how much they can invest in those consumers? Ritz-Carlton employees, of course, know that there is a very certain dollar value. I think it was pretty high. Last time I read it, I think it was almost like $1,000 or something that they had the control over to make a guest happy. So if the guest was unhappy, the employees could invest up to $1,000. Your margins might not be that high, but do they know? Can they invest $10 or $15? Can they buy them a meal? Can they buy them a coffee? Do they do anything to make the customer happy? So you get it, right? It's the concept of flipping the pyramid is nothing new. Servant leadership is nothing new. It's the best way to achieve sustainable success. But in order to do that, you need to really understand your stakeholders. And we talk a lot today about consumers and guests, and they are absolutely critical, and that should be the focus. But great leaders, good leaders will focus on a single stakeholder group. Great leaders will focus on their full stakeholder circle. So I just want to take a minute to show you what I'm thinking about here. The concept of the stakeholder circle starts off with employees, obviously. And it doesn't have to start off with employees, but it should, in my opinion. And then you talk about, well, it's not just the employees you serve, it's their families, right? What kind of benefits plans are you offering? And it's their communities. Do you have a program for matched charitable giving, maybe, or something like that? How are you meeting all the needs of everybody in your employee stakeholder group? Again, it's easy to focus on just one stakeholder group or one portion of them by focusing just on the employees. The great servant leaders focus on the entire group. Then you go to the peers. This could be your partners, your vendors. I think I actually cover vendors later. It could even be, though, your competitors, right? Makes sense if you think about it. You still want to serve even your competitors to some extent. If you have a hotel property in a particular section of Toronto and that area starts making a downturn and the hotel across the street is also hurting, it would make sense you'd probably want to collaborate with them on a solution. And what about the employees of that group? Maybe it's a larger competitor based on a more national scale, and maybe you work out something that gives your employees benefits as well as theirs. More likely a contract or vendor partner competitor. Suppliers, yeah, I mentioned vendors, so similar concept. And how are you helping their employees? Do you have discount programs for your suppliers' employees, as an example? Community. What are you doing in your community? I mentioned earlier, you can't just do a checkbox that says Community Day and call it a win. How are you continually investing in your community? And there's the direct community, your immediate neighbors, and then of course there's the broader region. You know, that could be Toronto, it could be Ontario, it could be Canada, it could be North America, especially Michigan, that state next to nearby. And of course your consumers. And I didn't put them last because I thought they should be served last by any means. Obviously the consumer is the focus on all things. But if you focus on your employees and you serve them with the inverted pyramid, and you say, okay, we are here to serve you to make your job easier, they in turn will serve the consumers better, faster, easier, which in turn makes happier consumers, which in turn makes happier investors. So, you know, I just want to say this is an incredible industry you guys are in. You should be leading the way in service leadership. I think Seneca set up a great example here today. Just looking at the circle, if you think about it, you've got partners invested here, you've got employees here, you've got a whole big stakeholder circle, community around here to help find the best solution for Seneca moving forward, and they are clearly invested in service leadership. I think it's fantastic. But whatever you do, don't forget that when you do this stakeholder circle, you're still in the middle. Not the top, you're in the middle. And when you're in the middle, a friend of mine looked at this and said, Ben, that looks like a bullseye. I said, yeah. I said, it is a bullseye for the problems. Because guess what, as a leader, you get to handle all those. So, now I want to take you back to our friends, Scott. So what happened with Scott? He was sitting there in the plane preparing for this big meeting, this life-altering opportunity for him to achieve his dream and start his own business. He got off the plane, and there was an airline attendant there waiting for him with a clean shirt. They called ahead and got it ready for him. So he made his meeting on time. This is him actually at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of his business. My wife and I'm happy to say we're still married. The wedding coordinator at the resort we were at was fantastic. She heard my frustration or my concern and bent all the rules. The formal policy was it had to be an official photographer from the resort, and it had to be their designated ceremony performer. She had a friend who could do the ceremony, and she did the photography. I'd be able to tell by that photo. But so we were still able to do it. It was a great ceremony. As a result, we have a wonderful memory. And Matthew did get to see his grandmother. He was a little too young to probably even remember it now, but the grandmother remembered it. They were able to do it because the airline had a policy, as many do now, but they didn't back then, of family emergencies get steep discounts, and they happen to have one that he was able to fly out there and see. All three of these cases were possible because of the culture of service leadership. Individuals who felt empowered, enabled, and supported to go out of their way and do the right thing by the consumer. But it began with the culture of service leadership. So, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.